right. Hi, everyone. So welcome. Good afternoon. I hope you are all doing well. My name is Beth Schill, and I'm a senior manager at the College Career Education Center. I help for those of you who are interested in careers in government, nonprofit education, also includes post-service work and some multinational stuff. So anyways, welcome to our, I think it's our 7th session on careers in public service. And today we're going to be talking about the 4th branch. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping rules. Like I said, we are going to be recording the session. So if you have any friends who couldn't join, or I know we had to change the time, you can view this at a later date. Also, if you have any questions, just feel free to send me a chat. I'm going to be doing my best to monitor that while we're going through everything. And yeah, you can have your video on or off at your comfort. So anyways, welcome all. And we'll go ahead and get started. All right, so today we are going to talk about what is this 4th branch of government. You guys are probably thinking, okay, yeah, I did my civics class in high school. There's 3 branches. What's this 4th branch? We're going to talk about what that is. We're going to also spend a lot of our time going over techniques on how to explore organizations in this branch. It covers a lot. And this is where I'm hoping that you all might unmute your microphones and turn your videos on and interact with me a little bit, and we can have some fun. And then if we have time, we'll kind of talk about the importance of networking as it pertains to this branch, because it is so broad and varied. And then also Q&A, but again, there's not a ton of us on the call, so if you have questions, just feel free to unmute, come on, ask a question. All right, so what is this 4th branch of government? So this whole last month and some change, we've been talking about different opportunities in the executive branch, the legislative branch, a little in the judicial branch. What we're talking about today is this 4th branch of government. And what I mean by that is this 4th branch is really all the organizations that I'll say make up DC. So these are the groups that influence or try to influence policymakers. It covers think tanks, it covers nonprofits, it covers advocacy organizations, and it covers lobbying organizations. So you can imagine that with all the different issues that our government works on in all different branches, the amount of organizations that makes up this 4th branch is immense. All right. So like I said, it also includes contractors and consulting firms. So for those of you who might have done some of the recruitment for like Deloitte or Ernst & Young, a lot of those that recruit on campus, especially this time of year, are working for their public sector. So a lot of their clients are government clients, whether it's federal, state, or local. And there's a lot of organizations in DC, besides the ones that come to campus, that do contract with the federal government in some way, shape, or form. So this is a huge part of the economy in this area, and it's a lot of opportunities. Government relations jobs. Now, this is kind of a catch-all phrase. Like I said, it includes like your straight up lobbying organizations, but also a lot of your nonprofits or your think tanks, as they're putting out reports and everything, they have a lot of their experts often are called on to give testimony. And so when we talk about government relations jobs, it's those types of jobs that kind of lie somewhere in the field of communications, marketing, public relations, maybe some writing, and sometimes some straight up lobbying. And that's, as you can imagine, another huge area of skills in this area. And then last, we have the advocacy, think tanks, nonprofit, different associations like the NAACP or the NRA. Those are both examples of groups whose job it is to really try and push for certain types of policy with different levels of government. So we're going to attempt to kind of go through at a very high level how we can organize a search in all these different areas. All right. So the second part, how do you know an organization is right for you? Like I've just named like essentially the entire economic system of Washington, DC. How do you even start to know if that next step is the right step? All right, so here is where I'm going to pose you all 3 questions, and I want you to write them down. And it pertains to your values, because all of these organizations are really much like other government organizations. They're all driven by a mission. It might be a more limited mission than some of the other groups we've talked about in previous weeks, or it might be focused on a really niche issue of, say, like poverty reduction or women's rights or Second Amendment issues. They focus on like one tiny part of some of these issues. So knowing your values is critical. So I'm going to pose these questions. They're created by Father Himes, who I believe comes from Boston College, and I find they can help us narrow our field of conversation down a little bit. Don't worry, it's not a quiz, just write them down. So the first question you want to ask yourself is, what am I good at? This can be school, this can be a language, this can be a sport, it can be a hobby that you're good at, doesn't matter, but what am I good at? The second question is, what brings me joy or contentment? So what are those things that when you're doing them, you just kind of get lost? And when you're done with them, you might be tired, but it's a good tired. And you're just like, yeah, that was time well spent. What are those things that do that? And again, it can be related to work or school, but it can also be like, I really just love making dinner, or I love being with friends or family, or running or swimming, or whatever the case might be. Okay. And the third question is, what does the world need me to be or to do? I'm going to repeat that. What does the world need me to be or to do? And this starts to get at some of those mission questions. So, like I show here, when we are answering these questions, the first two questions, what am I good at and what brings me joy or contentment, really kind of get at the what of a job. So like, are you doing research? Are you doing analysis? Are you doing sales? Are you doing development or fundraising? Are you doing event management? Like a lot of those things are determined by those two questions, like what am I good at and what brings me joy and contentment. So like the day-to-day, the what you are doing in that job. The third question, what does the world need me to be or to do, is the mission or the core why you do what you do. So what is it that gets you up in the morning? And for some students, sometimes this can be as simple as like, I need to pay back my student loans. So the why for me right now is to pay back my student loans. Or maybe you're helping family members out. So maybe your why is I need to earn a paycheck so that I can support my family. So that why can be really idealistic, or it can be very practical as well. And all of this is relevant when you're looking at some of these organizations. Okay. And I'll be sending around the slides too. All right. So once you kind of understand a little bit about your own values and what is important to you and what you think you may want to do with those values, the next step would be to identify organizations that share those values. So it's really simple. We're really just looking at brainstorming organizations where you believe you can find an answer to these questions, and then going and exploring those organizations' missions and values to make sure that they align with what you're interested in. All right, so I'm going to pause there for a moment and just ask you all, if you have a comment, based on those questions, are there any organizations that any of you all are interested in? You can come off mute or put them in the chat. What are organizations where you think you can make a difference, or in organizations you're interested in exploring more? Anyone?
I'd say the Wilson Center.
The Wilson Center? Okay, cool.
That's one of them.
Anything else? RFK? Yep, that's a good one. RFK Human Rights. What else? I know you all have some organizations you're looking at. Anything else? Okay, well, I'm going to start calling on people for the next part, because I'll need some participation if we're going to have a good conversation. All right. Okay. So the next step, so right now we've got two organizations. I know you all are interested in a lot more than those two organizations, as fantastic as they are. But the next step is, I see this happen a lot. A lot of students, like you're looking at a think tank, or you're looking at a nonprofit organization, U.S. Institute for Peace, or the Human Rights Watch, or the Environmental Defense Fund. These are some big ones that come up. When you're thinking about them, what you want to do is do what I call become an 8-hour expert on this topic. And what that means is you need to become smart on what this organization does and doesn't do. So, for example, it's one thing to go look at like, the U.S. Institute for Peace and look at their mission and their organization and be like, oh, okay, I see what their mission is. It's another thing to become more knowledgeable about what's going on. And so to that end, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to look at some of these organizations that two of you put out there. All right, so Max, we'll start with yours. So we're going to look up the Wilson Center. Okay, and can you all see this? Can you give me a thumbs up if you can see it? Yep. Okay, awesome. Thank you all. All right, so the Wilson Center. Think tanks are a great way to like show what I'm talking about. So you can look at like, okay, what about the Wilson Center? Okay, they do independent research and open dialogue on policymakers along a wide range of beliefs and backgrounds. And you might kind of scroll around the homepage and be like, oh, these are some interesting things coming up. Oh, they've got some cool events, et cetera, et cetera. You might read more about different experts, and that's good. But really, especially with think tanks, what you want to do is really dive deep. So looking at their topics, their regions, and their programs. Max, I'm going to go back to you because you brought it up. Is there an area in here that you're really interested in?
I'd say the Africa program, and then I guess there's also, I don't know, there's something like environmental in one of the programs. So there's one of them that has some environmental change and security. I know that's one's kind of interesting to me.
Is that, I'm looking for it.
It's right under Global Risk and Resilience program.
Oh, okay, cool. Let's check that one out because environmental change is a big thing right now. All right, so what you would do here is one, I would do two things. One, you look at the program, but then I would also, if you're interested in an area, also look at the area studies, because sometimes some of these programs, the programs will overlap with like the geographic areas, especially within some of our international focused think tanks, CSIS, Brookings, et cetera. But what you want to do here is definitely read about it, but then you really want to go into detail and you want to look at some of their recent publications. This group has films and podcasts, and even check out their events. One of the coolest benefits of being in DC, and now I know right now it's a little bit different because we're all virtual for a lot of stuff, but the cool thing is so many of these think tanks and nonprofits in DC, a lot of these events are free to the public. So that means if you don't have a class and you want to, you can go over to some of these events and just join on in. And they're at all different times. Sometimes they're during the day, sometimes they're in the evening. But you can see right now, this one's going to be doing a webcast. The first one coming up, it looks like it already happened, but it was on sustainable development in the Amazon. They have one coming up, which you can see it also crosses with their Polar Institute, integrated climate security across the US. It looks like these are all past webcasts, but what you can do is you can see if there's any coming up, put those on your calendar, or go and check out some of the ones that they've just had. And you can see on the left, they have a really cool way of filtering it here. But I encourage you to go to these events, especially once they start happening in person, because it's a great way to meet people. And with a lot of these think tanks, when you're talking about some of these specific projects or program areas, if you go to like an event at the Wilson Center and you go to an event at CSIS, and you go to an event at Brookings, and it's all around like talking about like sustainable development in a particular regional area, you're going to start to see some familiar names and faces. And while you're there mixing, you can start up conversations and start to learn where people are from. And that can give you further ideas of places you could go to look for opportunities, or even just, as we talk about networking later, a place to build your network. So in addition to events, I also make sure that you read their current publications. This is twofold. One, if you are serious about getting into the think tank world and you're really interested in the research arm, or same with like some of our nonprofit organizations that might have a lot of research and writing, reading their publications gives you a sense of what their writing style is like. And that is really important as a writer and a researcher when you're entering into these organizations to understand what their style is. I used to be a research manager at a think tank in DC. And we would often ask in our interviews, oh, what of our recent publications did you enjoy the most? Or we would ask, what would you change about our writing style? Or what do you think we could improve upon in our report writings? And I mean, I'm talking, we were interviewing like mid-career folks, and we'd be in the interview stage, and you would always be able to tell who had actually read the reports. And I'm not talking skimming the introduction. I'm talking cover to cover, underlying it, taking notes. And you could tell who had actually done the research into our work and who had just kind of skimmed things. And even at the intern level, if you're looking for research internships, having that level of understanding about the content and what you like and what you don't like, it's all really important, and it shows that you really understand what this organization is doing. Similarly, I'd also check out the program staff and fellows, and this goes for nonprofits too. So like we'll look at the RFK Center next. You know, understanding who the leaders are of the different departments. And sometimes I don't see it necessarily here. It might be if we click on their website, but like sometimes they have active Twitter handles or Instagram accounts or whatever, but like follow these people, especially the fellows on social media, or like you can see here, some of them are like this woman's at Columbia University, this gentleman's at George W. GW. You can see that there's folks who have positions in both universities and here. And so you can follow them, you can see what their research is. Some of these folks at think tanks, especially, are Georgetown professors. So, you know, you could use it to see like whose class you would like to take next or go to their office hours. But again, get to know the fellows. And this is also important because within this world of the fourth branch of government and advocacy and nonprofit work, everybody has a different angle. Now, an organization like the Wilson Center is going to be pretty nonpartisan, right in the middle. But I can guarantee you that each of these people on this page have their own views on whatever an approach to environmental sustainability in this case might be. Or they may have specific thoughts about, you know, some of the multiple players in the global context. And, or like I say, sometimes depending on the issue, you have some people who are more hawkish in their approach to foreign policy and others who are more dovish. And really the only way to understand that is to read their work and to read their press releases, watch them on interviews. And this again, all helps you. So when you're writing that cover letter, it's not just, I want to work at the Wilson Center because it's amazing, or I want to work at CSIS because I am a junior in the School of Foreign Service, which is again, great, awesome. But really like, I read so-and-so's paper on XYZ, and I am really intrigued by how they examine this, you know, X relationship. And I have studied something similar in my coursework, and I would really like to try and help further the understanding. You know, that reads much more powerfully than just kind of like a blanket statement. All right, so I'm going to pause there for a second. Any questions on this? Okay, so now I'm going to go for RFK Human Rights. Okay, who said RFK Human Rights Organization? Lily, okay, you can use the chat if you want, but is there something specific about the RFK organization that you were interested in? Or anyone? There's something you're interested in knowing more about? It's a great organization. All right, here, got a chat. Position and development. Oh, okay. So we're looking at a very specific position. So that brings up something else. All right, so if we're looking at positions, and now this is where it gets interesting because every organization is different in how they organize their employment. Sorry, my Zoom stuff's getting in the way of looking through a website. All right, so we're going to look at careers. Working, and you can read more about what they're like. And then, okay, so here they have job openings. A development manager, I'm guessing maybe we might be looking. Okay, so development manager. So what we could do here is check this out, and you can learn more about like the program. And development is often used in nonprofit and advocacy groups as a synonym for fundraising. They don't use fundraising because sometimes turns people off. And development really gets at the point of like, you are really trying to develop the relationships that can help sustain the work of the organization. And there's different levels of development. So there's member-driven organizations where like, think of like when you're listening to WAMU and they're like, we're doing our fall membership campaign, donate, $25 and you get a WAMU mug. There's that type of membership organizations or think tanks. Sometimes some of their work is sponsored by corporations. And so like we're looking at like 100,000 plus gifts, or you're looking at, like, for example, like, Paul Pelosi donated a bunch of money to the SFS to try and like, help promote public service. In that case, we have a development team who was working with him to try and determine like, where did the program need funding and where could he give of his money. So development managers really are looking at like relationship building, and it's at all different levels. So you can read more about it here, but what you would do is like, okay, so if I'm doing development and I'm looking to like, you're reporting to the director of the development operations, what I would then do is you can look at the about section of the organization. So sometimes it's about, sometimes now it's here, they say who we are. And what I would do is try and look up like who are the leaders in that organization are people. So you would look at like, you would just view all and try and find the director of development and then do a little bit of research on them. The other thing that a lot of organizations do, like you have the board of directors. So these are also people who help advise many nonprofits and organizations, and you can tell a bit about what the organization is about by who sits on the board. So like a lot of these people are actually pretty big names. So you can tell this is a big organization just by some of the folks who are involved. But the other thing you always want to look at, especially if you're doing development or you just want to kind of understand where an organization is going, you might not always be able to find it because sometimes they try to hide it, but you're going to look for your annual report. So nonprofits, NGOs, think tanks, they all have to put out annual reports. Even though they're nonprofits and they're not there to make money, they still have to be able to keep the lights on. So when you read their reports, one, from a development perspective, fundraising, you can sometimes understand like where their money comes from, and that can tell you something. So like I worked at an organization where our research was funded by corporate sponsors, and depending on the sponsor, yeah, you might be talking about some different influences in there. So every sponsor has their own agenda. And that's just part of like the nonprofit world, even if they're a nonpartisan organization. So your annual report can tell you that. It can also tell you like the general health of the organization. So like, especially post-COVID, you don't want to go work for a nonprofit that's about to like fail because, they lost money. So you could look at some of their they always start out with like a description about like what they did. But then usually towards the end, you can actually start to see information about like the financial health of the organization. And again, even with nonprofits, this is really important because I've met so many people who work at nonprofits. Oh, here we go. Here's the expenses. And half the time, no matter what job they're doing, they're trying to make money, again, to keep the lights on. So here it's kind of giving you a breakdown of like what their expenses are and then their revenue and where they're getting that from. So this is important information you just want to check out for any organization, but yeah, even nonprofits and advocacy groups, it's important to check out their annual report to understand what their financial situation is like, their financial health, and also just like what are they focusing on right now. So, all right. So I'm going to pause for a moment. Does anybody else, we got a little bit of time we can play with. Does anybody else have another organization you want to kind of check out or learn more about? And again, this can be think tanks, advocacy groups, nonprofits, government contracting, although that's a little bit harder, and government relation or lobbying organizations. Anyone? I'm going to call on folks. All right, Gray, Do you have any organizations that you're interested in or any social issues that you want to explore more?
I actually hopped on pretty late. I thought the Zoom workshop was going to start at 1, so here, happy just to keep listening. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Well, are there any organizations you're interested in exploring?
Really just
Okay.
curiosity about hearing what everybody else has to say.
Okay, cool. So Annabelle, Partnership for Public Service. All right. What are you interested in understanding more about them?
Honestly, I'm not completely sure. So I think last year I applied for some of their internships. They have a bunch in like there was presidential transition, like government reform, all of those things. So I guess just knowing better, like if I do apply again, how I can improve my application to be a bit more specific, I guess.
Absolutely, yeah. So, and I'll give you all the insider scoop. This is the nonprofit that I used to work for. So you're going to get a little bit more behind the scenes than perhaps you thought. All right, so then Partnership for Public Service, they're a nonpartisan think tank that is devoted to building a better government and a stronger democracy. It started primarily by this gentleman named Sam Heyman, who believed that, okay, young people are going to Silicon Valley, they're going to Tesla, they're going to Google, Facebook, wherever. And back, when Kennedy founded the space race, the best and brightest minds were going into government. And he started this whole organization because he believed that if we can get the best and brightest back into government service, we can make it better for everyone, regardless of about what you think about the size of government or the powers that it has. I think we can all agree that it could be more effective, right? It's a pretty big bureaucracy. So what I would do here is the partnership does a lot of great work. And what I would do is if you click on the Our Work button in here, you can see that there's a number of areas of work. They have, this is brand new, the Alliance for Congress is just kicking off. They do some stuff with what we call congressional oversight. So trying to make sure that now they're branching into helping Congress be more effective. Customer experience. So like when you call the IRS, because you got a question on your taxes, like what are you hearing on the other side? Or if you're interacting with the Postal Service and there's delays in your mail, like customer service gets into that stuff, which a lot of what we do and we take for granted is interacting with government. They do employee engagement, which is what they're well known for in the city. Hiring laws, so like federal hiring and how to improve it, how to get you all jobs in the government. They do a lot of really cool training programs with government leadership. And so that you see a lot of things about like government leaders, leadership development, and then they do some sections on innovation technology and then the presidential transition. Now the presidential transition work, it really revs up in like the year or two before a presidential election, and then it kind of quiets down and then they rev up again. I used to do some really cool work with them. That was really fun. And you can see that they do a bunch of different things. They do policy, they actually do policy recommendations, they testify to Congress, they help write amendments to bills. They do research on a lot of these issues. That's what I was doing when I was there, really diving deep into some of these issues. And like I said, they do training programs where they help try and train current government folks to be better leaders, because as you all will recognize if you haven't already, if you have a good boss, man, life is good. If you got a bad boss, I don't care if the work is really meaningful, it can be really tough. So you can read more. Is there, Annabelle, is there a certain area in here that you're interested in understanding more about? You said presidential transition, or is there something else?
I think that the training programs sound really interesting.
Okay, so let's go to leadership development then, okay? And it talks about like, yeah, leadership is the most important factor influencing federal agency performance and government effectiveness. And I mean, you can just see this in the news, like when they're talking about like different appointees being nominated to being a secretary of an agency and what is happening as a result in that workforce. I think especially when you have a major transition from Republican to Democrat and Democrat to Republican, you get different types of leadership in agencies, and you see people either jumping on board because they really admire a leader, or you see people jumping ship because they really do not like a leader. I think case in point, and this is not meant to be a political statement, but under President Trump, the State Department got really, really hurt. A lot of people did not like the first Secretary of State under Trump, and the State Department lost, I want to say, approximately like a third of their workforce. because of that. And it's something they're still working on bringing back up to what they were before. So here you can learn about their programs. So like they do training. They do some work with the Center for Presidential Transition, because again, appointees and like who your appointed leadership are is really important. Sometimes the people who are appointed to government positions are phenomenal at what they do. Sometimes they are just appointed because they did a lot of work for the campaign and they don't know anything about the agency that they are now charged with running. And that can lead to some frustration. And I've seen it happen both in Democrat and Republican administrations. So this is where you can read about some of the different programs that they do. But then when you're looking at like about them, if you look at like their internships, what you would then do is they have a bunch of different internship programs, and I believe it's due November 5th. So these are all open right now. Let's see. Oh, sorry, I'm skimming through this. Okay, so you can see they have like a couple leadership development programs, 2 remote positions, 4 DC-based positions. So like Annabelle, if this was something you would be interested in, you know, you could look at like these applications and the description here for the leadership development programs. They have some for Center for Presidential Transitions, communications. So if you like to write and read, you can do that. Development, again, this fundraising, government affairs. So this would work directly with the team that's going up to Capitol Hill. And I sat back to back with somebody who was on the Gov Affairs team, and we would always just trade stuff back and forth because I'd overhear him on a phone call or vice versa, and it was fun. And then research analysis and program evaluation. And then they have these federal workforce programs, government effectiveness programs. What you would do is read each of these and treat it individually. Now, I do know on the opposite end that you can apply for one team at the partnership. And if you're not quite a match for that team, but they really think you're a match for another team, they will pass people along. But that is something that you would want to kind of just be aware of, is that, yeah, you're applying to specific positions, but sometimes some internships will say, oh, not quite what we're looking for here, but you'd really fit in this other place over here. So this is the Partnership for Public Service. And one thing that they are really familiar with, which I talked about in past things, is they do the best places to work in the federal government rankings. That and what we call the SAMMYs Awards, the Service to America medals. If you're interested in their group, like, you would want to at least look up those 2 programs so you could speak to them. Or like I said, this new Alliance for Congress is just starting. It's going to be kicking off in the next couple of weeks. So like, if you want to have like a Congress that earns the public trust by listening, leading, and legislating effectively for our diverse nation, like if that's something that sounds cool for you, I would go ahead and give them a look. But and like I always tell students when I meet with them, if you really are interested in the Partnership for Public Service, again, talking about the network piece, I used to work there, so you've got an advocate in me. If you ever apply, let me know. I can often let people who are looking there know that I have Georgetown students coming their way. So
awesome. Thank you so much.
Not a guarantee, but it's something, right? And that's what we talk about when we're talking about network. All right, so, oops, sorry, didn't mean to do that. Press the wrong button. All right, so that's why when I'm talking about this understanding and kind of getting into that deeper mode, that's what I'm talking about. The last thing I'll just mention, because this whole world is the 4th branch of government, understanding political trends, budget battles, appropriations, like, so for like example, right now, if you want to understand a nonprofit or a think tank or an advocacy group in DC, knowing what's going on right now with all the back and forth about the Biden administration's infrastructure bill that they're trying to pass right now, understanding if the impact of that bill might impact the organization you're applying for is big, because there's a lot of stuff in a massive bill like that. Or even when we get to just budget times and like the Congress is trying to say, okay, DOD, you get this much money, and we're going to throw money at this problem, and we're going to throw money at that problem. You know, I once had somebody when I was looking for jobs say, follow the money. And that means we're either following the money to the agency that it's going to, so the federal agency it's going to, or the state agencies it's going to, or we're following the money to the nonprofits and the think tanks who are either supporting that work or who are maybe fighting against that work. So again, case in point, typically under Republican administrations, environmental sustainability efforts, like so the EPA gets funding taken away and other environmental organizations within government get the money taken away. However, you see your environmentally focused nonprofits and NGOs get huge boosts in money because people still believe it's an important issue and they try and throw money at that problem. And so like a lot of your nonprofits and your advocacy organizations will see an increase. So that's when I say follow the money. It's like either you're going to find money in federal agencies, which translates to jobs, or you're going to see it in these advocacy groups that are really trying to push for what their issues are. Unless it's something like COVID where it's public health and just like the money's just everywhere at the same time. Yes, Bezos Earth Fund. Yes, that's a big one. And so some of this you can just find out, by listening to the news, and like, when you hear different things like, oh, Biden passed this, and then these other groups saw their donations spike as a result. It's just that kind of thing you're kind of keeping an eye on. And if you're going to be in this city, in this town long enough, like you're going to start to pick up on kind of it's a cyclical nature. One administration comes in, funding flows a certain way in the federal government, funding flows a different way for the nonprofits and the advocacy organizations. And there are times when certain groups are flush with money, times that they're not. And the nonpartisan organizations typically are in the middle and they have probably the most stable budget. So if you're looking for an organization that's like sound and steady and not changing too much, some of your nonpartisan organizations are probably your best bet. All right. So to that end, a couple other places. So some places where you can find out about this. One of my favorite websites, because you guys saw where I just used to work. I used to go way, way, way into the weeds on like federal appropriations battles and legislation about the nuances of federal hiring reform. So like I can get really into federal policy. One of my favorite websites is the Federal News Network. Now, I would say this is relevant if you're looking and trying to understand some of these trends. A lot of it right now is about like the pandemic and returning to work. You can see at the top, they have stuff on technology. So like if you're interested in like cybersecurity, they are starting to get into artificial intelligence. If you're interested in the defense industry in general, workforce management, this is helpful for like, how much agencies might be doing in terms of hiring. Or lately, they've been trying to pass funding to help get paid federal internships for students. That's something that I've been watching that they've been writing about, same with pay and benefits. And they have podcasts and stuff. The Fed Talk radio is probably their biggest one. So like right now, they have one on, hey, look at that, security clearance mythbusters. Some of you, if you're interested in federal government, might want to check out here. But that's probably one of my favorite places just to see where the focus is in government, because where the focus is in government, it trickles down to every part and every organization in our city. A couple other spots that are interesting are Politico.com, again, for the same thing, like who's meeting who's talking to who, what lobbyists visited what offices to try and get something passed. All this is going on right now. The Hill is a similar type of publication. Foreign policy is really good for those of you who are really focused on foreign policy issues, that same kind of insider baseball, because at the end of the day, everything we are talking about in this entire series, really, but in this group especially, this is politics, big P politics and little p politics. Working for a lot of these groups, you are trying to make a difference. You are trying to change policymakers, and that's politics. Politics isn't a dirty word. And whether you're researching or you're helping to run events for advocacy groups, or you're organizing rallies on the mall, or you're trying to directly influence a particular policy person to try and support a bill or withdraw their support, this is all that insider game of baseball. So, this is stuff that, I bookmark and, start to get to know it. And it's just one step at a time. The other thing I wanted to show was like some awesome DC listservs, and this is on our website at the Colley Center. But it's also just good to know, traversejobs.com. We have a subscription for it that I'll send you all the web page for. Tom Monotos Jobs and Daybook Jobs. They both have like a small fee for subscriptions, but it's really not that bad. It's like the equivalent of like a fancy coffee at Starbucks. Let me pull up the Career Center page where you can find that. But those are like really well worth it if you're interested in this world. And they post positions that range from like government hill jobs to some of these agencies and organizations that work to try and influence jobs. So I'll see postings for, you know, lobbyists or other people that are there. All right, so hang on. If you go to this page on government relations, those same listservs are listed there. All right. Whoops, yeah. And then here in Georgetown, if you aren't already, be sure to sign up for GU Politics. They do some really cool work. They have some really cool sessions coming up, and they often do stuff throughout the year that's like, you know, if you want to work on a campaign or if you want to work at lobbyists, and they get people to come in and speak to like their specific fields. You can always look at the government, nonprofit, and education newsletter, which is the one I put out. And then our pages, one of which I just sent you, the careers and government relations pages online. These are all fantastic resources for you to use. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment and just open the floor. Who has any questions or concerns, or something still seems really unclear to you? Bueller? All right, I'm going to call on somebody. Paul, do you have any questions or thoughts?
Not really. Well, if there's like a field that I'm interested in, but I don't know of any particular organizations, is there like some systematic way that I can look for them? Or
no, that's a really good question, because yeah, like pick your social topic, issue, any issue, and there's a lot of different organizations that are going to represent all sides and parts of that issue. Honestly, you guys are going to laugh because you're going to be like, really, this is what you do? But like just doing a smart Google search, so like best organizations for X in Washington, DC or New York City or wherever you might be wanting to locate, and just look at like what some of the organizations are that are out there. And that's where, when I go back to those 3 questions I asked at the beginning and really trying to figure out, when we're looking at some of these issues, excuse me, like what it is about that issue for you that interests you. You know, I think that is important. So the more specific you can be in that search. And then what I would do too is start to see if those organizations are posted on Handshake, and mark that employer as a favorite employer in Handshake, because whenever, like, say they come to a career fair or they're going to come give an information session, like I think the International Rescue Committee has been like, really, they need so much help right now because they're dealing with a lot of the refugees that are coming in from Afghanistan. And like, I'm still getting emails that they need help like right now, let alone next semester. And so, you know, you could look them up in Handshake and you could add them as a favorite employer. And then anytime that they come to campus or anytime that they post a position, you're going to get an email in your inbox saying, hey, the IRC has positions that they just posted you might be interested in. And the more you do that, not only do you get notified about when they've posted something or when somebody's coming to a career fair or doing an information session, but on the back end, the algorithm of Handshake starts to get more knowledgeable. And so it starts to say, okay, you're interested in, refugees, asylum seekers, things like that. And so it will start to pull up other internships or jobs that maybe have some of those same keywords. And that's when Handshake can get really, really powerful. And especially when we're talking such a broad field, it helps to have like a little bit more. And then you can chat with us or folks at the career centers around campus, depending on what level you are at. And we can sit and talk with you more too about like a specific area within this field. Anybody else? Kaylee or Anna? Oh, Rob, you raise your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Well, just I don't. This is, I guess, almost kind of the $1 million question, but I'm wondering. I feel sometimes like there's 1,000,001, students in DC that are interested in these types of organizations and policy issues. Is there a good way, do you think, of standing out, or at least not saying something, say in a cover letter, that is too cliche or raises any kind of red flags type of thing?
That's a really good question. And it is true. A lot of groups that we're looking at, especially like the well-known think tanks and advocacy groups and stuff, you're right. Yeah, not only are you competing with, your peers at Georgetown, but also your peers at Mason and GW and American and, all this ones in the area. And if you're looking at summer internships, to be frank, you're competing with students from across the country. So that's why I spent some time talking about researching an organization, really going in and taking the time. Say we're looking at applying for summer internships, taking the time now this semester, because they're not hiring quite yet for the summer. That'll be starting in January for the competitive think tanks and nonprofits. But take the time now to go to their websites, understand the experts, understand what are their publications, go to some of their events. Like a lot of them are virtual right now. So as long as you don't have class, there's no reason you can't attend it in while you're making your lunch or what have you. And take that time to really understand the issues and how your own interests connect with those issues. Because skill-wise, you're going to have the skills to succeed at many of these organizations, but it's do you get what we're about? And like I said, I have interviewed lots of people in this region from the other side of the desk, and it was really easy to see who was applying just because they heard of us and thought we were cool versus who had actually sat down and researched what the organization did and read our reports and had taken that time to get to know what we were about at a deeper level. But that's a really good question. And then you can also make an appointment with us and we can help go through, that's why we're here at the Career Center. You've got drop-ins every day from 1 to 3 p.m. as well as some virtual hours and one-on-one appointments. That's part of why we're here too. So Robert, if you have specific work groups or an area that you want to make sure that your resume and cover letter is crafted accordingly, that's what we're here to help with as well. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah. Thank you, Lily. Take care.